half-dozen centuries. Another light appeared, a hard blue-white spark that spread into a larger, less brilliant yellow light. At the same time, all the alarm devices in the command room went into a pandemonium of jangling and flashing and squawking and howling and shouting. Radiation, energy release, contragravity distortion effects, infrared output, a welter of indecipherable radio and communication screen signals, radar and scanner ray beams from the planet. Trask's fist began hurting. He found that he had been pounding the desk in front of him with it. He stopped it. "We caught him! We caught him!" he was yelling hoarsely. "Full speed in, continuous acceleration, as much as we can stand. We'll worry about deceleration when we're in shooting distance." The planet grew steadily larger. Carford was taking him at his word about continuous acceleration. There'd be a Gehenna of a bill to pay when they started decelerating. On the planet, more bombs were going off just outside atmosphere beyond the sunset line. "Ship observed. Altitude about 100 to 500 miles. Hundreds, not thousands. 35 degrees north latitude, 15 degrees west of the sunset line. Ship is under fire. Bomb explosions near her," a voice whooped. Somebody else was yelling that the city lights were really burning cities or burning forests. The first voice, having stopped, broke in again. "Ship is visible in telescopic screen, just at the sunset line. And there's another ship detected but not visible, somewhere around the equator. And a third one somewhere out of sight. We can just get the fringe of her contragravity field around the planet." That meant there were two sides and a fight. Unless Dunnan had picked up a third ship somewhere. The telescopic view shifted. For a moment the planet was completely off-screen, and then its curvature came into the screen against a star-scattered background. They were almost into 2,000 miles now. Carford was yelling to stop acceleration and trying to put the ship into a spiral orbit. Suddenly they caught a glimpse of one of the ships. "She's in trouble." That was Paul Koreff's voice. "She's leaking air and water vapor like crazy." "Well, is she a good guy or a bad guy?" Moreland was yelling back, as though Koreff's spectroscopes could distinguish. Koreff ignored that. "Another ship making signal," he said. "She's the one coming up over the equator. Sword World impulse code, her communication screen combination, and an identify yourself." Carford punched out the combination as Koreff furnished it. While Trask was desperately willing his face into immobility, the screen lighted. It wasn't Andre Dunnan. That was a disappointment. It was almost as good, though. His henchman, Sir Neville Orme. "Well, Sir Neville, a pleasant surprise," he heard himself saying. "We last met on the terrace at Carvel House, did we not?" For once the paper-white face of Andre Dunnan's âme damnée showed expression, but whether it was fear, surprise, shock, hatred, anger, or what combination of them, Trask could no more than guess. "Trask! Satan curse you!" Then the screen went blank. In the telescopic screen the other ship came on unfalteringly. Paul Koreff, who had gotten more data on mass, engine energy output, and dimensions, was identifying her as the Enterprise. "Well, go for her! Give her everything!" They didn't need the order. Van Larch was speaking rapidly into his handphone, and Alvin Carford was hurling his voice all over the Nemesis, warning of sudden deceleration and direction change. And while he was speaking, things in the command room began sliding. In the telescopic screen, the other ship was plainly visible. He could see the oval patch of black with the blue crescent, and in his screen Dunnan would be seeing the sword-impaled skull of the Nemesis. If only he could be sure Dunnan was there to see it. If it had only been Dunnan's face, instead of Orme's, that he had seen in the screen. As it was, he couldn't be sure. And if one of the missiles that were already going out made a lucky hit, he might never be sure. He didn't care who killed Dunnan or how. All he wanted was to know that Dunnan's death had set him free from a self-assumed obligation that was now meaningless to him. The Enterprise launched countermissiles, so did the Nemesis. There were momentarily unbearable flashes of pure energy, and from them globes of incandescence spread and vanished. Something must have gotten through. Red lights flashed on the damage board. It had been something heavy enough even to jolt the huge mass of the Nemesis. At the same time, the other ship took a hit from something that would have vaporized her had she not been armored in collapsium. Then, as they passed close together, guns hammered back and forth along with missiles. And then the Enterprise was out of sight, around the horizon. Another ship, the size of Otto Harkoman's Coruscant II, was approaching. She bore a tapering, red-nailed feminine hand dangling a planet by a string. They rushed toward each other, planting a garden of evanescent fire flowers between them. They pounded one another with guns, and then they sped apart. At the same time, Paul Koref was picking up an impulse code signal from the third, crippled ship. A screen combination. Trask punched it out as he received it. A man in space armor was looking out from the screen. That was bad, if they had to suit up in the command room. They still had air. His helmet was off, but it was attached and hinged back. On his breastplate was a device of a dragon-like beast, perched with his tail around a planet, and a crown above. He had a thin, high-cheeked face, with a vertical wrinkle between his eyes, and a clipped blonde mustache. "Who are you, stranger? You're fighting my enemies. Does that make you a friend?" "I'm a friend of anybody who owns Andre Dunnan his enemy. Sword World ship Nemesis. I'm Prince Lucas Trask of Tanith, commanding." "Royal Mardukan ship Victrix." The thin-faced man gave a wry laugh. "Not been living up to her name so well. I'm Prince Simon Bentrick, commanding." "Are you still battle-worthy?" "We can fire about half our guns. We still have a few missiles left. 70% of the ship sealed off, and we've been holed in a dozen places. We have power enough for lift and some steering way. We can't make lateral way except at the expense of lift." Which made the Victrix practically a stationary target. He yelled over his shoulder at Carford to cut speed all he could without tearing things apart. "When that cripple comes into view, start circling around her. Get into a tight circle above her." He turned back to the man in the screen. "If we can get ourselves slowed down enough, we'll do all we can to cover you." "All you can is all you can. Thank you, Prince Trask." "Here comes the Enterprise," Carford shouted, with obscenely blasphemous embellishments. "She hairpinned on us." "Well, do something about her." Van Larch was already doing it. The Enterprise had taken damage in the last exchange. Koref's spectroscopes showed her haloed with air and water vapor. Her instruments would be getting the very same story from the Nemesis. Wedge-shaped segments extending 6 to 8 decks in were sealed off in several places. The only thing that could be seen with certainty was the blaze of mutually destroying missiles between. The short-range gun duel began and ended as they passed. In the screen, he had seen a fat, round-nosed thing come up from the Victrix, curving far out ahead of the passing Enterprise. She was almost out of sight around the planet when she ran head-on into it, and vanished in an awesome blaze. For a moment he thought she had been destroyed. Then she lurched into sight and went around the curvature of Audhumma. Trask and the Mardukan were shaking hands with themselves at each other in their screens. Everybody in the Nemesis command room was screaming, "Well shot, Victrix! Well shot!" Then the yo-yo was coming around again, and Van Larch was saying, "Gehenna with this fooling around. I'll fix the expurgated unprintability." He yelled orders, a jumble of code letters and numbers, and things began going out. Most of them blew up in space. Then the yo-yo blew up, very quietly as things do where there is no air to carry shock and sound waves, but very brilliantly.